Section 2, I will survive. The question before us now is, how do we help ourselves and others? Because we really can't expect society to change without us taking the lead. There are 4 main elements to consider in terms of surviving and thriving in our culture. Your mindset, building community, how we bring people into the light, and finally, how we care for ourselves. Element 1, your mindset. The first element is quite simply how you view parenting and parenting in our society. Too many of us go into parenting without realizing that we will be going against the grain for much of it. If we expect parenting to be easy and that we will be supported and appreciated by others, not an unreasonable expectation by any means, then we will struggle even more when it doesn't happen. I like to think of this as being parallel to how we view infant sleep. When we have an understanding of biological infant sleep, we learn to temper our expectations, and those night wakings and frequent feeds become something we can handle instead of something that causes anxiety, because we're so worried about what we're doing wrong to cause these problems. Now, parenting is similar. Many people find it hard and wonder why they alone seem to struggle so much. They wonder what they've done wrong, when in reality they are neither alone in struggling, nor is it anything that they themselves have done, but rather the environment they find themselves in. Now, if we can accept we haven't done anything wrong, but we are hopefully the sane ones in the midst of this insane world, the worry should decrease. You aren't raising entitled brats. You aren't ruining your children for this society. You are simply providing for them exactly what you know they need to become the type of person you hope they can be, based on goals centered around happiness, love, care for others, and subjectively defined success. Now, sometimes knowing this doesn't help. In fact, it may create more panic. This often stems from the feeling that somehow we're supposed to provide more to overcome for our own lack of support. Let me reassure you now, you don't. This is where the idea of good enough parenting comes into play. Now, often this theme has been used to justify not so fantastic parenting. But in reality, if we are responsive to our children, most of our parenting will be good enough to overcome the lack of support we have. The key is to focus your efforts on where they will have the biggest impact, your child. When you have the choice to focus on being responsive to your child or something else, try to choose that responsiveness. Now, this isn't always possible. Sometimes other things have to come first. But luckily for us, even our most sensitive children benefit when we do our best. Orchid or high needs kids may need us to find ways to prioritize our support for them more than for other kids. But we can often do this through how we engage with our kids, not necessarily needing to do even more. For example, these children may do better with our quality time spent each day playing through difficult situations or scenarios for them, so they can better prepare for them or cope with what might have happened. Now, this can take as little as 5 minutes, but it's a valuable tool for their emotional development and can make up for perhaps not having 30 or 60 minutes a day with them one-on-one. Now, in conjunction with this acceptance, I sincerely hope this awareness also allows you some freedom to let go. Specifically, let go of the expectations on you, the parent, to do more than you're able to. Others may have expectations of too much for us, but as long as we don't buy into them ourselves, we can try to structure our lives in ways that benefits our mental sanity, our parenting, and our children. Element 2, building community. As we know, we need people around us that get us and support us. The problem for many people is that the people closest to them are not those who get our parenting or even support our parenting. Instead of offers to help, most people get criticisms and negative comments about their kids and what they're doing. Now, although technology can be a pain in the ass sometimes and even bring out some horrid behavior in people, it can also be the first step to building the community you need. There are wonderful groups online and on social media where you can find like-minded parents, even if they aren't in the same vicinity as you. Now, having an online community that you feel a part of can be a game changer for your mental health. First, it allows you to know that you aren't alone, which is really what most of us need. Second, it can mean you have a space to go 24 hours a day to vent or seek support and so on, which can actually be an advantage over a physical community. Getting some instant support can be a real lifesaver in some situations. Now, sometimes these online communities become physical ones if there are enough people close to you. Many of us can be leery of these things because we grew up at that time when we were told never to meet people off the internet. But times have changed, and as parents, finding those people who align with your values is essential. Some of my greatest parenting friends were met through evolutionary parenting, so I know firsthand the value of opening yourself up to that. Now, online communities aren't everything though, because often we need some practical support that comes from people living close to us and supporting us. Now, the next element we'll talk about is about getting people on board who are already close to you. But you could also start to look into local groups to meet other like-minded parents. Some, like La Leche League, may seem oriented towards one thing, in this case breastfeeding, but many families also share certain gentle beliefs, and thus the groups can provide a way to meet other like-minded parents. If you go to local parks, try to go without another adult and strike up a conversation with a parent who may be doing anything you see as being gentle, like not getting angry at an upset child, to see if it's the start of a friendship. Now, some community centers do drop-ins, and as they provide activities for kids, this can be a great way to meet other families. Now, another avenue is to attend local workshops that focus on gentle parenting techniques, as this can be an excellent way to identify parents that are at least looking to parent as you do. Now, a final option, if you have the energy, is to organize a get-together yourself to try and meet other parents. I know this puts the burden on you to find your community, and that can seem unfair when you're exhausted and worn down. But sadly, in our culture, we often have to make the first moves. Now, if you struggle with social anxiety, this can be compounded. And so in these cases, I would recommend trying out the online world first and then aiming to meet just one person that's local and close if you can. Remember, if you can find just one person, that can make a world of difference. And you can also hopefully piggyback off their community as well. Element 3, getting people on board. Regardless of whether or not you have a community for you, you will often have to try and recruit people to your side. This is because many of us face issues with family, friends, even partners, and these are not those people we can simply tell to get lost to easily. It's also because, as discussed in section 1, we do have a biological imperative to be with them, to have them help us on this journey. Now, I know many people will find it unfair that we have to take the burden of cajoling or convincing people when we are in the right. I hear you. And I feel that frustration, and if at any point you feel that it's just not fair, it is 100% okay to just tell people to fuck off. Honest, that is your right. However, sometimes we don't want to tell people this, or we do, but not really. What we want is for people to recognize where we're at and join us. Now, the question is how. There are several parts of successful interpersonal communication that can help you here. 1, acknowledge where they're coming from. It may be the stupidest place in the entire universe, but if we can't acknowledge it, they will shut down. For most people, that place is fitting into the cultural mainstream. This means they will want you to do things that other people are doing because going against that makes them nervous. It's okay to acknowledge, not accept, that this is important to them, or at least that they think it is. And it will also make it easier for you to help draw them away from it because you know exactly where they are and why it's wrong. Number 2, acknowledge good intentions. Hard again, but it's true that most people want what is best for our kids. They may be misguided in how they're going about it, likely because of where they're coming from, but they do mean well. If we can give them that, we likely won't be as defensive, which then allows them to ease up on their own digging in. 3, remember their history. For most people, they go to what they know, which is their own upbringing, and many of them struggle to acknowledge the damage or personal problems that may have arisen from that. This means that they are going to struggle with thinking anything that happened to them was less than perfect, and thus they'll be willing to subject others to the same thing. If you can realize that moving away from that place of comfort will cause them anxiety, you may be more patient with them and can help them through it. 4, lead them towards the answer. This is otherwise known as Socratic questioning, as Socrates had a wonderful way of bringing people to the answer he already knew. When people arrive there on their own, it is far more powerful and convincing than simply being told. This can be hard and requires practice, but sometimes it can be easier than we think when it comes to our kids and teaching gentle parenting, as they very logically go together. For example, a common concern is that other kids are sleeping through the night or more independently than our own. For this issue, you can ask the person why they think your child is waking more. Suggest various options to see which ones they're drawn to. Ask if they feel leaving them to cry would be okay if there was something bigger going on, and what would it actually teach the child? Force them to perspective take by bringing up other situations like elder care, or perhaps even any time when they may have been in pain or scared. At the end of the day, though, if you can't lead someone to water, leave them out in the field and focus your efforts elsewhere. Element 4, self-care. Self-care has gotten a bit of a bad rap these days. In many cases, people view self-care as being about putting themselves first, ahead of those around them, even kids, and ensuring they're always in a good state of mind. After all, happy parent equals happy child, right? Not really. The focus in self-care should not be about just happiness. It should be about what allows us to stay centered, grounded, or just plain sane. It is not inherently about pampering oneself, like having spa weekends away or fancy tubs every night, though these might play a part in some elements of self-care. Looking at it this way, some may be more willing to consider it. On the flip side, though, we have others that are angry at the concept because it speaks again to the individual having to take over what many feel should be a cultural or community issue. There's a point here. Caring for new moms has been a part of many cultures throughout history, and providing this support means the burden and burnout parents face isn't as common in these other cultures. However, we can be angry at our society and work towards change, while still owning that, unfortunately, we may need to take more control ourselves in this particular area. Now, I view self-care as a necessity, and some elements of it are not things that others can do. In fact, self-care is a bit of a misnomer here because in my world, it encompasses much more. And even in a supportive society, you would still be responsible for some of it. Now, I believe that there are at least 3 main types of care that you need to be aware of and take stock of in your own life: daily care, weekly care, and relationship care. Now, there may also be other types based on your own needs or stages of your little ones, but these 3 often apply across the board. So let's examine them one by one. Daily care. Each day, your stress levels build up throughout the day. Your ability to tolerate various things will vary day to day based on your baseline stress levels, and throughout the day, most of us get more and more testy because that stress increases, which then decreases our ability to cope with everything around us. We can start the day cheery, but by nighttime, we're a complete mess. Now, daily care is our ability to help take the edge off, so to speak, so that we can try and stay somewhat leveled throughout the week. This is typically a 15 to 30-minute period that you have the time to do something that helps you feel human again. For some of it, it is that bath or a short yoga session or reading a book. It is not social media, it is not work, it is not housework. Sometimes this can feel wrong when we have so much else that apparently needs doing. But I recommend you take to heart the research that shows us that people who do less actually get more done. Now, what I mean by this is that when we take these small breaks for ourselves, we are actually able to restore ourselves enough to be better able to focus, and the rest of what we need doing takes less time than if we were to not give ourselves this break. Weekly care. Daily care also works in conjunction with what I call weekly care. If you think about daily care as just taking the edge off, weekly care is really about restoring you. I find more people are good about weekly care, but not so good with the daily care. And the problem here is that if your stress levels are ever rising throughout the week, that weekly care serves to just take the edge off on a weekly basis, leaving you with no opportunity to actually fill your own tank. So if we use the tank analogy, daily care is the equivalent of filling it up by a couple bucks a day. Not enough to feel full, but enough to keep from running totally dry. However, weekly care is about filling it up, say, halfway. So if you start at halfway and you don't fill it up all week, all you do is get to near empty or empty and then get back to half. However, if you start at half and are able to keep it around that level, even if it drops a bit, when you get your weekly care, you're actually filling it up even more. Now, some weeks will be harder than others and we'll feel more drained, but some will be easier and we may feel like we're headed into a week with a full tank for the first time in a while. Now again, weekly care is about doing something that is meaningful for you, be it a course, a social date with friends, a trip to the spa, whatever. It should be something that helps meet the needs that you feel are being missed during the week, whether it's intellectual stimulation, social time, pampering yourself, etc. Relationship care. Now, the final kind of care is about our relationships. Often people jump to the romantic relationships, but I include all others of value here. So let's be honest about how much time our kids take up in our lives. They can be all-consuming, taking us for a ride that we don't even know we have the energy for. Often our relationships with others can fall to the wayside, and over time this can breed resentment and start to create breaks in what was a strong foundation. When it comes to romantic relationships, the lack of care that can fall into them is often one of the primary reasons the other side ends up arguing in favor of things like sleep training or getting a child to be more independent before they're ready. We can often feel angry at this if we're the ones on the receiving end because we're so focused on meeting the needs of our kids that it feels like a slap in the face. Yes, it would be lovely if everyone could see the value and learn to cope. We are, after all, the adults. But we all know the effect of having our tanks run dry, and it doesn't matter if we're 2 or 40, an empty tank is an empty tank. Sometimes getting others on board is just a matter of figuring out their needs and your own needs and making small changes to ensure everyone feels cared for. But romantic relationships aren't the only kind. Sometimes the relationships that start to break are with other children in the family, especially when we have very young ones. And if you happen to have an older orchid child, you can feel very pulled in all directions as they can struggle even more when their tank isn't full. Now again, finding out what their need is and finding ways to meet it is essential here for you and them. But how this happens will be individual to each of you and those in your life who need more connection. Now, one recommendation I do have, though, is to be very clear about how special the bit of time is for you and your child. Sometimes we have special times with them, but don't label it as such. And so they don't get that feeling that we're really there for them, but they rather just expect this behavior as the norm and then get upset when they don't have it. Now, I'm the first to acknowledge how overwhelming all of this can seem, and you probably think I'm an ass for even suggesting that you add to your already full plate. However, I would argue that much of how you'll be able to parent in this world is dependent upon your ability to care for yourself too. If your well runs dry, there is nothing to hand off to your children, and this is a problem. Now, many people feel that they just can't, and that it might be selfish or whatnot. And so I ask you, if your child was in this position with their children, though hopefully they'll have you, what would you say to them? Would you tell them to go until they can't? Or would you ask them to brainstorm ways with you to find some care for themselves? Once we accept this need, then we can focus on slowly building it up. Now, I recommend people pick the one area they think is most doable and work on that first. Obviously, you won't get it all done right away, but just start slow and build up from there. As you get used to this time being carved out, it becomes less of a big deal, and soon you don't actually know what you were doing without it. Now, one of the problems that often derails people is that they pick a time and it doesn't work, and they feel they just need to try harder or give up altogether. As frazzled parents, we are often really, really bad at assessing what times work for us. Now, this isn't about not trying hard enough, but about being honest with what our limitations really are. Now, that is what you need to know that this is going to be a trial and error type of thing. And when something doesn't work right away, it may not be you. It may just be the time. But however you make it work, you need to be willing to do this for yourself, as no one else is going to at the moment. Bonus, vive la résistance. When you're in the pits and it feels awful because you're alone and tired and stressed out, remember that this is part of a greater movement. You hopefully haven't decided to parent this way because it's easy and you'll get all the praise, but because you know that it's a valuable act of resisting the type of culture and community we were born into, and hopefully changing it for our kids. Now remember what I said earlier. What you're doing is in essence telling everyone exactly what you think about these cultural norms. And you're not thinking sunflowers and roses, are you? It can be hard to remember that we are still at the early stages of fighting for a new culture. It's doubtful we'll have child-friendly and family-friendly societies in the near future, but with each child that is raised with responsiveness and respect, we'll continue the small steps forward. And eventually, those smaller steps become the larger change that we've been looking for. Now, this is something that can help propel us forward when things are hard. And I know we are all different and we all face the struggles differently. However, I do believe that every single one of us can benefit from remembering that we are a part of something bigger than us, something that isn't just about your one child, but about the entire world in which he or she will grow up in. Now, realizing your valuable place in this can help offset the immediate frustration because it also gives us a space to vent. We can look around at our society, the random people walking by, and mentally tell them all to fuck off, which can be cathartic. But it also works to remember this because it helps us to feel something that we all need and that we identified above, a sense of belonging. Now, I want to talk briefly on the psychology of espionage here. Now, we aren't spies, but we might as well be. To spy is to infiltrate another community, one in which you really don't belong to, and yet you have to get along there, and most importantly, not lose the reason why you infiltrated in the first place. If you join your adopted community, you've failed your mission. Yet the need to belong is so great that we can easily fall prey to that. So what do? Well, if we're the ones training spies, we have to ensure that they know deep down how valuable their role is. We also have to ensure that they know how important this mission is. And they have to know that there is a whole community out there to which they do belong. They may not get the benefits of that community, but it's there and they are a valued member. And you are too. There is a community, a whole group of us who are out there fighting this fight too. Sometimes we get lucky and get an opportunity to spy alongside someone else, making it a little less lonely. But when we don't, we have to find that mental strength that tells us that we are still a part of something important, that our role in this is valuable, especially to the little ones that call us their parents, and that we belong. Not the easiest place to belong, but we belong nonetheless. I've often thought it would be wonderful if there was a sign we could wear to identify ourselves to each other. Much like the symbol of representing the quest of the Deathly Hallows in Harry Potter, we need a symbol that identifies us as the parents on a quest to respect and value children, families, and those who support them. Then perhaps we could more easily find each other. But until there is, we'll have to settle for our online rooms and chance encounters and make the most of what we can do, which I hope you now realize is much more than you may have ever given yourself credit for, and that you too can survive this thing we call responsive parenting.